John Lynch giving clues to what and why the San Francisco 49ers did what they did in the 2025 draft, and Jacob Cowing, almost not a San Francisco 49er in the 2024 draft, and the latest on Brock Purdy's contract. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking Niners ball throughout the draft season, which was a whole lot of fun. We're still breaking down all the prospects. We pushed back the Alfred Collins, CJ West defensive tackle portion of the post-draft review because a little bit of news today that I want to get to. John Lynch speaking about the draft and some more Brock Purdy contract news. And then we'll get back into the prospect reviews, which we got plenty of time to get ready for camp and get you all primed on these 49ers prospects. So we'll talk big men tomorrow. And joining us is Joe Marino from Locked On NFL Scouting to give his insights to the Bills trading up in front of the Niners a couple times and his expert opinions on the 49ers draft picks. I think he was a fan of the 49ers draft, and he's a big man, and he likes himself some big men in the trenches on his football teams too. So Joe Marino is going to join us tomorrow. Croc, Chris Sims and the Unbuttoned podcast with Ahmed Fareed, former local guy, is doing a lot of national stuff now, and they had John Lynch on for a nice long conversation. Now, a lot of the conversation they had was about the Buccaneers and Chris Sims' short time as a teammate with John Lynch and some other stuff and how John Lynch got to where he is right now. But the interesting stuff to me was some specifics about the 49ers draft and specifically some draft intel this year and a story that John Lynch told about last year's draft, which I found fascinating. And maybe we can do a little sleuthing and try to figure out who almost became a San Francisco 49er in the 2024 draft instead of Jacob Cowing. But I want to start with
real quick. I mean, that right there lets you know, right? The fact that they would have taken a linebacker, maybe they got sniped or whatever. But I think a lot of times people think that the teams just don't want to address certain positions, but things happen that make it kind of changes the course. And then all of a sudden you don't draft a linebacker at all, or you wait till super late. And now people think, oh, they don't care about that position or they don't want to address it. It's like, well, we did. We really like this guy. He was gone. We weren't just going to force another guy at that position just to force or draft a player at that position. We want the guy. We want the guy that we really like. So I just kind of want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and the reason I love this portion of that episode was, and not very much of the episode was about the draft intricacies, but I geek out on this stuff, and I want to hear about what happens during the draft. How do things go down? And that story specifically is really interesting. And first of all, he talks about, and we kind of already knew this, but he talks about how heavily the coaches are involved in the draft process. And he talks about how they go through their draft meetings and all that stuff. But in the 2024 draft, he said that, and we'll talk more about Mykel Williams and what they thought about the trade up possibly there and the Saints. There's the team that they're worried about taking Mykel Williams. But in the 2024 draft, they still hadn't decided who they were going to take in the late fourth round when they selected Jacob Cowing. They still hadn't figured out who they were going to take with 45 seconds left on the clock. And Kyle Shanahan's like, we still got time. We still got 45 seconds. Let's figure this out. And it was between Jacob Cowing and an unnamed linebacker. And so they're like, okay, Cowing or the linebacker, show of hands. 45 seconds left on the clock. And so they put their hands up. It was really close. And so they went through it again. There's 20 seconds left. And Kyle Shanahan's like this and this. And they're kind of going through their, okay, show of hands again. Let's go. There's 2 seconds left on the clock. And I don't know how many hands Kyle Shanahan's hands count for, but it sounds like Kyle Shanahan got his guy rather than the defense getting their guy in the linebacker. And so Jacob Cowing ended up being the pick for the 49ers, and they had about 2 seconds left on the clock when they turned in the pick. And so Cowing was the pick. He won the show of hands in the draft room. But I love that because it shows you how inexact it is and how it's not that different from your fantasy football draft where you're running out of time on the clock and maybe there's someone you thought was going to be there is not there. And so you're scrambling and trying to figure out what you have to take. You're looking at your needs. You're looking at the best available and you're trying to figure out which player to take. and then you end up taking a player. And it's not that different, and it can be chaotic in the real NFL draft too. Just because these guys wear suits in their interviews and get paid a whole lot of money, that doesn't mean that this is an exact science or that things don't get chaotic. And so I loved hearing that story because it really clues you into what things are really like on draft day for teams.
Whew, I mean, that process right there. And there's a lot of times where we, agree or disagree with the way that they go about things. I think more times than not, at least me, I'll speak for myself. I kind of have an issue with their process a lot of times, but with the results, how could you complain too much, right? And their process has really netted the 49ers 4 conference championship appearances and multiple Super Bowl appearances. So ultimately, they're doing a terrific job with however they're doing their roster building, but things like that, right? Like I would just ideally like a little bit more conviction with who you're drafting, because I feel like the more conviction you have, the more you're all in on whatever goes into drafting that player or developing that player. And not to bring up Trey Lance, but we saw that with Trey Lance, right? Like the day of the draft or the day before the draft, they're trying to, trade for Aaron Rodgers. So if you are the day before, you're confused on how you should go about this process, and hey, should we call about Aaron Rodgers? Let's see if he's available, right? How convicted are you to develop a player that needs a lot of attention, needs a lot of development? So whether it's Trey Lance or other, right? It could be Jacob Cowling, because everybody's kind of split and you weren't sure, are you still going to be 100% in on what it takes to make sure that Jacob Cowling becomes the best version of what he needs to be? And will he have the same kind of opportunity as someone who you maybe were more convicted on drafting, right? Like Mike McGlinchey. Now, again, a little different, 9th overall pick, but McGlinchey, they were probably going to live with his ups and downs, whatever those were, because we're all in on this guy. We agree he's the guy. Let's do it. And we're going to live with the ups and downs. And he was a 4 or 5 year starter for the 49ers. Jacob Cowling, muff a punt, do some weird things. And that lifespan for him with the Niners is cut a lot shorter because, well, there's going to be people, we didn't like him anyways, or I actually like the other guy. Or I told you we should have drafted the linebacker. So I'm not going to kill them for that. I mean, we're talking about a 4th round pick or whatever, but I just would like a little bit more conviction because everybody's different and some of these players need a little bit more time.
Yeah, and there's no way that even on the highest picks, like there's no way that everyone was on the same page with Mykel Williams. Some people are probably like, yeah, you know what? I don't know if there's enough pass rush here. Maybe we'd be better off taking this other player at this other position or this other guy over here. And so you have to come together, and that's your job as GM. And I think that's where John Lynch is actually pretty good. Maybe there's too much input from too many people, because you look at other draft rooms and there's certain teams that do a really good job of showing what happens in the draft room. A couple that come to mind are Chris Ballard with the Indianapolis Colts, and then Joe Douglas last year with the Jets. And do you remember when Joe Douglas, one of those, like, how the Niners have the, I forget what they even call it, but we call it soft knocks, where it's like their own in-house production and they show behind the scenes stuff. They have that with the Jets last year. And it showed Joe Douglas. He's like, oh, this guy's going to draft ninja. He wanted to get his guy. And he was trying to trade for Malachi Corley, the wide receiver, for like a round and a half. And he's trying to trade up in the second round, trying to trade up. And then finally in the 3rd round, he ends up trading up just barely a little bit, I think, and ends up getting his guy. But I'm watching this and it's like, dude, nobody wants your guy, dude. Like he was trying to trade all this stuff to go way up and get a guy. None of those teams cared. Like everyone always wants their own guy, and they think everyone wants their guy, but most of the teams don't care because they want their own guy, which is a different guy than you want. And so these teams talk themselves into it, and it's fascinating. And then the Chris Ballard one was fascinating too, because nobody in the room, he's not getting input. Nobody in the room knows what he's going to do. So it's not like some scout in the back can be telling Albert Breer who they're about to take, because he doesn't know. And all of a sudden everyone's watching and it comes down to it, and Chris Ballard stands up and chooses the guy, and everyone claps like, yeah, good job, Chris Ballard. It's so every draft room and every team does it very differently. So it's nice to hear some insight in how the 49ers do their thing.
I think what they should probably do, and you hear it's just not like this, but I listen to a lot of John Middlecoff, and he talks about the scouting side of things a lot. They don't really listen to the scouts. And like the scouts are the one, they're driving around, they're going from town to town, they're on the road for hours, they're meeting these guys, they're talking to the janitors, they write up their reports, and then it gets to John Lynch, it gets to Kyle Shanahan, and it's just like, all right, we'll take it from here.
Right.
And sometimes maybe when the team is on the clock, maybe you should kind of value that scout's opinion on this player, because maybe they'll tell you, you know what, I like this guy, but guys, I wouldn't take him here. Like, this is not where he should go. And they need somebody there to stop them from doing that. I think if you and I were a part of the 49ers front office, and especially you, because you said this, and you said this on the show. I remember you hearing this. It was something along the lines of, hey, like Trey Lance, like these prospects, I would not trade up for any of these prospects. You wait to see if they fall to you. And if they don't, you pivot and you draft, I don't know, a Micah Parsons or somebody. But I would not have traded up to get one of these guys. You said that before, you said that after the trade, but before the draft. Like, that was your way of how you would do it. And they didn't have anybody there to tell them, hey, don't use multiple first-round picks to move up for one of these guys. Like, you don't need to. And I'll take the Patriots in the way they did it. Everybody knew they needed a quarterback. They stayed at pick 15. And they got Mac Jones, a guy that they probably liked all along. Now, it didn't work out, but hey, in the process, we didn't give up 2 extra first-round picks and a third the following year. It was just, all right, we take him, didn't work out. Okay, we can get rid of him. It's not this colossal mistake where now when we look at the Trey Lance trade, it's probably the worst in franchise history.
Absolutely. And I think John Lynch kind of admitted that in this interview as well. I'll talk a little bit more about what John Lynch said than specifically about this draft in 2025 and why Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins were the guys for them early in this class next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and playoffs are in full swing. Warriors advancing to the next round, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And how about Buddy Hield threes? Yeah, could have won yourself some cash on that one, taking the over. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off, live during the game, player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. How about a parlay? How about same-game parlay? So if you got a read on who's heating up, you can get in on the game and play while the game is going on. And how could a $200 bonus in bets add to the excitement if you win your first $5 bet? So if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So I thought it was really interesting that John Lynch admitted that early on, speaking about trades, he was asked about trades and how they decide with draft intel who's going to take who and where they need to go up and how high they need to go up and what player might get snatched up and by who. And he said that early on they were super aggressive and that they might have been a little, he said, I don't want to say we didn't know what we were doing, but he admitted that they were naive and new to the process because Kyle Shanahan was the first time decision-making head coach and John Lynch was the first time GM and really hadn't spent that much time even, hanging out around front offices when they got this job, right? And they were very aggressive early on, and they've still been a pretty aggressive organization. And so he was, and so I think part of the Trey Lance thing might have been the big one that was like, okay, guys, you got to chill out a little bit. And it kind of goes back to the thing we were talking about with Joe Douglas. Is like, not every team wants the same guy that you want. And there's a chance that guy might fall. And it's not a one-player draft because odds are you don't know that much more than every other team. And the more throws of the dartboard you have, the better off you're going to be in most cases. Sometimes a trade up pays off, but almost all the time. I think it was Eric Eager, who used to work at PFF as their analytics director of analytics or whatever it was. He did a study of NFL trades. I think it was 100%. It wasn't even like one of the trade ups won. Essentially, every trade down won the trade in the NFL draft. of the time period that he was studying, and he now works as an analytics. He might be director. I can't remember what his title is, but he works for the Carolina Panthers now in their organization. And what did? They traded down in the draft, and they were willing to take less, according to reports before the draft, because to a lot of analytics people, taking less in trade versus what the chart says is still a win. So if you can get those trade downs, you take them in the NFL draft in the long run. Sometimes it might make sense to trade up, especially if it's a short distance. You're not getting a bunch of future firsts.
I've seen a lot of his work. And again, hopefully the 49ers, we'll see if they add someone from the outside that, hey, like, I specialize in this. And I know you have your football people. I'm a football person as well. And I got this day. I've been studying all these different things. And I understand this. I'm just here to help. And again, hard to argue with a lot of 49ers decisions because of the success they've had. But they have had some colossal blunders that have just been able to fly under the radar because of hits like George Kittle, who Eric Crocker famously wants to trade, or some of these other guys, the Fred Warners and all those guys, the Dre Greenlaws. It's like, well, these are all these good players. So the trade up for Reuben Foster, the trade up for, and his issues weren't so much on the field, aside from health, but obviously the off the field issues. But Reuben Foster, the Dante Pettis, the CJ Beathard, and there have been a lot of, hey, we're trading up for this guy, and it not work out at all. And it's kind of been overlooked. But maybe there could have been somebody that helped them just never do that trade. Never. Heck, the 49ers drafted Brandon Ayuk. And again, they traded up for Brandon Ayuk. I'm not saying they could have stayed there and got Brandon Ayuk, but how much worse would they have been if they would have said, well, okay, we stay here. We didn't get Brandon Ayuk because somebody jumped up and got him, but heck, I don't know. We could draft this guy from Clemson named T. Higgins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's it. That's what it is with the draft. And maybe that's why the 49ers have turned over a new leaf. They weren't super aggressive in this draft. I thought there was a chance they might trade up in round 2 after they took the first position. They didn't want to wait to see if someone might take a defensive tackle in front of them, which maybe the Bills did because the Bills traded up in front of them a couple of times. We'll talk to Joe Marino about that tomorrow, who also covers the Bills as well as the draft. And they didn't trade up in the second or third round, which I thought they might have had an opportunity to do that. So he did say they're learning to be more patient there. And I think we saw that in this draft. And when it comes to Mykel Williams, John Lynch was asked how they collect draft intel, and basically said nobody really knows, but he did say that people like to talk. And whether they tell their wife something or they tell somebody something, or they think they're not really dipping their hand when they talk to somebody, but really by saying nothing, they're saying something. I heard Albert Breer talking about that, where he collects intel from teams, and then nobody wants to tell him exactly what they're doing, but they want to hear from him what he thinks the other teams are doing. And so it's a game of telephone, and they all talk to each other. But then he can tell who a team is going to take, because when he brings up that player, the GM or executive they're talking to all of a sudden clams up. He's like, okay, well, I think I found something here. So by saying nothing, you still say something. So information gets passed along, even if, GMs and teams aren't really telling people, or trying not to tell people what they're going to do. But essentially, the Niners thought the Saints were going to draft Mykel Williams. And so they were trying to trade up to get in front of the Saints to draft Mykel Williams. And John Lynch says he thinks that I always want to call him Aaron Banks. Kelvin Banks, who the Saints ended up taking at pick 9, he says if Banks wasn't there, that they would have taken Mykel Williams, he thinks. But he's like, I can't call Mickey Loomis, and Mickey Loomis is not going to tell me what he's going to do. But all their other intel told him that they would take Mykel Williams. Now, were they right? I don't know, because there was a lot of intel in other years that you're wrong about. But anyway, the Saints ended up taking Banks, and so Mykel Williams was there for the 49ers. They didn't trade up, and it turns out they didn't need to, and they got their guy. One last note from John Lynch in that interview is, and this is interesting too. So, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the scouts versus the coaches getting involved. And I think you nailed it, Croc. Like, the scouts do all this background work, and they're way ahead, and they've been scouting Aaron Banks since he was a 5-star for years, and he didn't really have a chance to play as a rotational guy because they had 2 stud defensive tackles in front of him at Texas, and he didn't really get to play a lot till this year. But he's been on the Niners' radar for a long time, and the scouts knew who he was. He's a 5-star that went to Texas. Same with Mykel Williams; like, he was high on their list going into the year. And so both of those players, I wonder if they're leaning. I wonder if the scouts maybe even lean too much into what stars you have coming out, because what the player turns out to be is more important than what they were coming into college. But it sounds like Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins had been on the 49ers radar for a very long time, and they've been tracking these prospects for a long time and really like them basically since they started their college careers. But I think you're right, Croc. So the scouting department does all their work, and they've been working on all these guys, and they present, here is our talent pool. This is our cluster of guys. This is how we rank them. They pass it off to the coaches, and the coaches and John Lynch then kind of decide of those players who the Niners end up selecting. So the coaches have a huge say in which guys they end up getting in the end. But I think that list that they start with is curated by the scouting department. And that tracks with what I thought about, what I've heard about the 49ers process, the short version of their process. But
I'm good with like that process, right? And that's the short version of it.
Yeah.
But how many of the scouts are in the war room the day of the draft to maybe say, hey, like, I know you like this guy, you've been watching him, but I've been following him for a few years. I wouldn't take him here, or I wouldn't trade up for him. Like, is there somebody you have a similar grade on and you're willing to miss out on this guy if somebody does draft him where I stay back and hey, you get him here? Or, man, listen, this is somebody you need to trade up for. This is someone I'm willing to go all in for. I am standing on the table. I heard Middlecoff one time tell a story about his falling out with Chip Kelly. It was over Matt Barkley. I guess Chip Kelly's like, I gotta have Matt Barkley, and Middlecoff's like, I don't think you do have to have him. Like, I wouldn't. That's not a guy I would go with. And that was kind of their big falling out. And then later, Middlecoff was fired.
Yeah.
But maybe I wish Middlecoff would have maybe convinced them to sign me when I had my workout, because I had my workout with the Eagles. Middlecoff was there on the field during my workout, and they didn't sign me. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But sometimes they need some convincing, and I think we all do at times. I think my wife is there to tell me, Eric, don't buy that. You don't need that. And I'm there to do the same thing with her most of the time. Amazon has made it a lot easier and sneakier for her, but you need that person that's there to tell you no.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Something shows up on your doorstep and you're like, Kyle, did you just trade up for somebody on Amazon.com? Like, what's going on here? We don't need another wide receiver. We needed the linebacker, Kyle. What are you doing? I think it is part of that. And I think historical perspective and just understanding some things like, hey, guys, hold your water here. You don't have to do this move in March. We can trade up for a quarterback on the clock. We can, instead of trading 2 firsts, we can trade 1 first and go up to pick 6 instead of going all the way up to pick 3. There's a lot of ways to do this. Let's see how the board falls. Let's finish our evaluations, right? Just that perspective. In this draft, it's like, hey, guys, this is a 220-pound outlier at linebacker. History tells us this player is going to be there later. You don't have to draft him at pick 75. This is a 5'8" corner. These guys go late in the draft. They don't go in the 3rd round. You could probably wait on this, but it's really hard once it gets to that point, especially with the coaching staff, because the coaching staff doesn't care or cares less about those types of things, I think, a lot of times. And so that's why you need someone with probably some seniority and a good historical perspective of how things are going to go in the draft. What is a smart play? What is a risky play? What is too risky? And yeah, I mean, it's a learning process. And clearly early on, I think Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch had a lot of learning to do because they were relatively new to the whole process of general managing a football team, despite all their vast football knowledge. It's a different thing than, dialing up plays. Brock Purdy. You're muted, Carl.
I was muted. Yeah. Can't Kyle just listen to his dad?
Well, I mean, it's hard because I think coaches want to have the say over everything. So his dad's probably like, hey, you're the cook, man. So you get to, his dad is probably one that's like, hey, you do what you do because it's your ass on the line. It's your job, right? So he might need someone that's like, I don't know, like just that 30-year ex-GM as being somebody that's like, nope, look, back in 1985, we did this thing. And, guess what? The Matt Barkley, it's perfect. The coach is like, oh, saw him in the Pac-12. Pac-10, it might have been the Pac-10 back then. The Pac-12, he's awesome. We got to have him on the football team. And you need someone with the power to be like, you know what? Just chill out. we'll finish this up. We got to do a little quick break. I want to talk a little bit about the latest news, or is it really even news about the Brock Purdy contract negotiations next? Today's episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, reminders, football practice, all in one easy-to-see place. What would it mean to eliminate the I don't knows and the excuses from your family routine? It's all there on the Skylight Calendar, right? And would seeing your whole week clearly on a 15-inch HD screen help you stay focused and less overwhelmed? And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That is Skylight, SKYLIGHTCAL.com/NFL. This conversation reminds me of the Shadow 49ers that I did for almost 10 years, and it started in the Trent Baalke era. And essentially, my whole thing was people, some people would be like, trying to fluff up my ego. Be like, oh, Peacock, you should be the GM of the 49ers. You should be. And I'm like, no, I don't want all those hours. I don't want to be an area scout. There was a time I would have been an area scout. I don't want to spend, 90% of my time on the road anymore. It's not a high paying position. I like what I'm doing right now. But the thing is I was always like, you know what I want to be? I want to be Dikembe Mutombo in the draft room. Trent Baalke turns in that card. It says AJ Jenkins, and I swat it out of his hand. No. I'd swag the finger and say, bring something else. Bring me a different card, right? Let's see a different shot attempt here. That's kind of my thing. And there's times with the 49ers in the newest regime, less often for sure than Trent Baalke era. But sometimes you're like, oh, this one doesn't add up. Let's put one more mind on this. Let's reject this one. And let's go back to the drawing board on this idea. Because I think when you get like Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch super competitive together, you can talk yourself into some things. And sometimes they talk themselves into some weird stuff like trading up for Trey Lance.
So you want to be kind of, Scott McCloughan, right? Like he is the
consultant. Yeah.
The consultant. Like you could definitely be that. And that maybe we can have the Peacock consultant company and teams would hire us to give them advice.
Yes. Be like, let me run this by you. What do you think about this plan? And be like, no, well, this is the big problem in this plan. You can't be drafting this player here. Traditionally, this is not a good idea. This is not a good idea. This player can't do this. This player do this. I like that.
Don't trade up. Don't spend multiple first round picks on a guy that you didn't know you wanted when you made the trade. Right.
And
like we're here to tell them, like, you probably shouldn't go about the process that way.
And that didn't even play football in the last year. And it's only played one season of football at the FCS level. There's a lot of.
Now, once they made the trade, I was like, okay, yeah, you draft him. But you didn't have to make the trade.
I want to talk. To be honest with you, this Brock Purdy story is a complete non-story. So that'll take maybe 30 seconds at the end of this podcast here. But since we're rolling on this subject, the 49ers had it. So and this is the thing is like teams are always like, and look, I don't think I should be in the 49ers front office and making any decisions. But I'm an analyst and I analyze. That's what I do. The 49ers, not only should they have not traded up, period. They shouldn't have traded up when they did. They shouldn't have given up what they did to go get that pick and draft any of those quarterbacks. But they actually had it exactly. They had 3 players. They had them exactly in the wrong order. Their order was Lance, Jones, Fields. And so far in their NFL careers, they had it exactly wrong. The best one has been Fields, still not worth that pick or that trade up. Jones, and then Lance is barely hanging on in the NFL to a job at all. So not only did they get the trade up wrong, not only did they get the timing and how much they gave up to do it, they got the evaluations wrong too, Croc. They got every part of that completely wrong.
The process, especially once we start learning more about their process with it. That, hey, trading up, we didn't know. And there was something else with it as well. Where I said, wait, what? And it might have been them saying, oh, we could trade up for a guy. We're going to spend all these picks. But we got Jimmy Garoppolo still. And it was just odd. It was just odd. And I don't know how many other teams would have approached it that way. I think another odd scenario, signing Kirk Cousins to so much guaranteed money and then turning around a couple months later and drafting a quarterback in the top 10. That is odd, right? So it's not just the 49ers. Like, there's some other odd things. Now a team who it sounds like wants to get out from underneath Kirk Cousins, but they kind of can't, like, the money makes it odd. So you just have this top 10 quarterback pick and Kirk Cousins sitting behind them making 30 plus million per year. Right? It's just very odd. I would have told them, don't do that, or I would have swatted it out their hand, and one or the other. We're going to go with Kirk and draft a mid-round guy, or you're not going to go with Kirk and you're going to go all in on this guy and maybe sign a low-level, veteran quarterback.
Yeah, and even in that situation with the Falcons, even though it's been weird and imperfect, they gave themselves 2 swings to find a quarterback, and in the end, they're paying whatever Cousins costs, and they have a great backup and what they think is a future starter. So in the end, when you look at what they've given up, they didn't have to trade up. They were able to get, I can't even think of his name right now. They were able to get Mykel Penix right there wherever they were in the draft. So if you just said, hey, look, you're going to spend 1 first-round pick and $30 million, and you're going to have 2 legit quarterbacks, one's a veteran that could be a starter and then a great backup, and then one's your quarterback of the future, that's really not that bad. It's still weird and odd, right? But it's a much better plan than what we've seen some other teams try to do, which is either have a bad quarterback and afraid to move off of them, trading too much to get a guy that's completely unknown. And so it gave the Falcons gave themselves at least 2 swings at the most important position, and it cost them some money and 1 pick, which isn't all that bad. In the end,
the guaranteed money for Cousins is what makes it tough, because I think it is difficult for them to move off of him.
Yeah, and then you
have to put yourself in that position for a guy that now you no longer want.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that. I wonder if they didn't expect to like the rookie quarterbacks as much. They're probably like, well, we can't get these two or 3 top guys that we really like, and then they went through the process and like, you know what? I think Penix is a dude. So I wonder if that changed for them during the process, and it wasn't even the plan. And they're like, well, now we can't pass on because we love this guy too. About the 49ers and Brock Purdy, Croc. A report from The Athletic. Mike Jones reports, Croc, that Brock Purdy is expected to wind up with a contract that will pay him around $50 million per season and places among the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. And that is the contract that the 49ers and Brock Purdy are working towards, and sounds like it could be done at some point in the near future and not be something that goes into September. This is nothing against Mike Jones and his reporting. I'm sure it's accurate, but I mean, we could have made up this report yesterday, Croc, because this is not like it's not like a surprising report. Like, I would assume that this should be what the report is right now, right? So I think this is, while it's somewhat news, I don't think it's really news at all. We expected around $50 million, and we know that they're negotiating. So that's where we are. I don't think that's any way breaking news about Brock Purdy and the 49ers.
Not breaking news at all. And I'm still in the camp again. If I am Brock Purdy, why would I take less than some of these other guys that are getting paid 53 to 55 million? And I say some of them because not all of them, because the way that Lamar Jackson's contract is constructed makes it like less money than that. The way I think Joe Burrow and there's another one.
Actually, Stafford's contract went
Josh Allen.
Josh Allen too. Yeah, Josh. A lot of guarantees on Josh Allen's contract. So while it doesn't look like, the $60-70 million per year contract we thought might have been, a bigger chunk of it is guaranteed. So, and again, like, the contract will be done when it's done. So talk to me when it's done, because that still means it's not done if there's still a lot of negotiating going on. If the more they know about how much per year means that there's still some kind of holdup there with the contract as well. And
the holdup is that, like, bro, I'm not signing that for $50 million a year.
That might be the holdup. Because what side did we hear that report from? Is that the Niners being like, I think we're going to do it for 50, and then if you ask the agent's like, I think it's going to be 55. So are we there again? Are we far apart still? So again, like, come to me when the contract's actually done. That'll be a big time report. But I expect it to be around the 50 million range, and so this is not super breaking news to me. I will say that there are some different contracts, and so there's I could see why it would be very difficult to figure out this deal, not only because it's a massive deal, but Matthew Stafford's contract that was rumored to be done is now official as of today. And that's $44 million, I think it is. So he's making less, and he's a better quarterback currently than he's a better quarterback. Like Matthew Stafford doesn't really get credit for how good of a quarterback he is. Obviously, Brock Purdy's a lot younger than Matthew Stafford, so this might be a very short-term deal for Stafford, and they might draft his replacement. They tried to draft his replacement last year, according to reports, and the Rams might draft his replacement next year now instead. They got that extra first-round pick from the Falcons. If you want to talk about bad moves the Falcons did, I'm fine with the Penix and Cousins thing. They traded a future first-round pick to go up and get a second edge rusher. And we just talk about how people don't really know what they're doing in the draft, and it's coin flips anyway. They really think they know what they were doing, and they went up and got James Pierce and gave up a future first-round pick to do it. They better be right on that one, because that one could look ugly. And they didn't go up to get a quarterback. They went up to get a pass rusher when they just got a guy who's very similar 10 picks earlier.
Bad process. They need Peacock and associations or associates.
Yep. Excuse me. Peacock and associates. Yeah. And everyone listening to this podcast is one of our associates too. We're crowdsourcing this thing. The more minds you can put together, I think the closest you'll get, and the closer you will get. And again, we've had some people say, "Oh, what is consensus board matters?" I think there's power. That's a lot of mind power put together to put something that is consensus, like a draft board. After all these experts break it all down for months and months and years.
Did you need a bunch of minds put together to know that drafting an edge rusher in the top 10 and then trading a future first round pick to jump back up and draft another one that has all these character issues was a bad process?
Man, you could talk yourself into a lot, Croc, and we see teams do it all the time. Pete Croc and Associates for hire. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All that said, I think the Niners had a really good draft, and we're going to break down more of their players. The defensive tackles coming up tomorrow. Collins, West, and a very special guest to help us out right here, Locked On 49ers.